Good evening, everyone. I'm Gemma Wooltorton from Perth, Western Australia, and I'm on Whadjuk Noongar country. The ACI acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we are gathered today. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and we express our gratitude for their wisdom and leadership in caring for our country. David.
We thank you, Lord, for Pope Leo XIV and Pope Francis, for their teachings and guidance about love, life and justice, for Father Bruce Duncan's continuing unfolding of these teachings, for Joseph Cardine's teaching us to encounter you and one another in word and deed, in reflection and action, rather than delegation to professionals or relegation to the future. May our parishes and Christian communities see, take seriously and act with our neighbours in need. We pray in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 Thanks very much, David. Could I just maybe add one more little prayer for Pat Walsh, who was to do our webinar last week on the 50th anniversary of Timor-Leste. Pat's quite ill, so if you could, please remember him in your prayers. And now, yes, my honour and privilege to introduce Father Bruce Duncan, Redemptorist. Apart from other things, in many things that he's done in his life, Bruce, he was my PhD thesis director, for which I'm eternally grateful. Helped me to get it done after a great struggle on my part, and I'm very proud to have achieved that with Bruce's help. But more generally, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bruce's work over the years, particularly in the field of Catholic social teaching. And he's really been Australia's, certainly I would say Australia's leading light in that field for many, many years now. And so we're particularly honoured to have Bruce here tonight. I think, as you know, he lectured for many years at Yarra Theological Union. And now he's moved into I'm not sure if it's a more relaxing retirement phase, but I'm sure I know he's still occupied with the Redemptorist community, but he's generously made the time this evening to share some of his insights into Pope Leo's important new Apostolic Exhortation. Thanks very much, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your generous introduction. It's a strange document we're looking at today. It's not the sort of document I would expect to come out from Leo, and the one I was expecting was something more like Pope Francis' first Apostolic Exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel, which encapsulated a lot of the material coming out of Latin America from their Aparecida conference in 2007. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But Francis' document, Leo's document, Pope Leo's document, is quite different, but it builds on what Pope Francis had already drafted. So Pope Francis had done the first draft of it and had intended to publish it, but of course he died before he could finish that. So Pope Leo has picked that up and really made it his own. And I think he can do that because he shares so much of the life experience of Francis, the issues he's dealing with, and is trying to pick up where Francis left off. But what is unique about this document, I think, is that I think what Leo is trying to do is to reach out to people who might have been wondering or worried or antagonistic to Francis's direction of engaging faith and social responsibility very closely as interrelated, integrated together in what Christianity is all about. So Why do I say that? Because in many parts of the world, even in Australia, some of the more conservative groups haven't taken to Francis very easily, and some are very strongly opposed. And they see the role of a church as being to pray to God, to go to church on Sunday, to keep the commandments, but consider that it's a private business, and the church should stay right out of the political and social arena. Well, that has never been the position of a church, but many people think that has been the position, or should be the position, of the church. And so Leo, with Francis before him, are trying to address this by saying, no, look, we've got to get back to who Jesus was, what he's saying, and to really wrestle with the demands that Jesus puts on us and the importance he gives to being in solidarity with the poor, caring for the poor, the sick, the disabled. And so both Francis and Leo now together are trying to bring Catholics together. And Leo says, oh, not just Catholics, he writes this document for all Christians, that all Christians can, if they're really in full feeling the full reality of Christ and his Holy Spirit in their lives, then they'll be able to integrate these things together. So Leo's document is Dilexi Te, which means I have loved you. And it's taken from part of the scriptures, of course, but meaning words from Jesus and from God to us. And notice that Te is personal. It's Francis had written Dilexit Nos, God has loved us. It is switch in title, but Francis makes it personal. Dilexi, I have loved you. I have loved you personally. So, and the strange thing about Leo's document is 2/3 of the document is given to tracing in the history of the church how tightly Christians have seen faith and their social responsibilities knitted together. So I'd like to say a little bit of word about the context for what both these popes are speaking to, and to have a quick look at Pope Francis' document, Dilexit Nos, which is a partner document to what Pope Leo has written. So just to begin with the context, you may recall Pope Francis wrote a document, Laudate Deum, praise God, means in just 2 years ago, on October the 4th, 2023, it was a cry of anguish for him about the failure to really take all the action needed to deal with the global warming and climate change, and secondly, to start to implement all the great hopes and dreams and plans of the Sustainable Development Goals the United Nations had voted in 2015. Pope Francis had been a strong advocate for that. He'd worked very behind the scenes, well, not just behind the scenes, he addressed the United Nations General Assembly, and they went immediately after that and voted them in. So he's, and why is it that he's so concerned about the Sustainable Development Goals? Because it's about how we can eliminate hunger throughout the world, how we can alleviate the worst forms of poverty, how we can make sure that all children are educated, that particularly girls are educated, how we can do all the other things, that how we can have greater equity in the distribution of wealth. All these things in the 17 goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, are spelled out with targets in quite some detail. But unfortunately, the governments haven't provided the money. The will to do this has lapsed, partly because of the number of wars we're having, Ukraine now, Gaza, Israel, and other parts of the world as well. A lot of that money has been disappeared into arms. And more particularly, the people who control the international finance, well, there have been many people trying to get on with all these programs of how do we create a better world, and not enough has been done. So we're missing crucial opportunities, and particularly as the climate change gets more pressing, then it's going to be much harder to deal with. So in this document, Laudato Deum, 2 years ago, he lamented that the world is now at a tipping point, very dangerous tipping point, and as we may be well, he doesn't say this, but we may be well past that tipping point already. So he's quite distressed about that. And he again appeals for people to really take this seriously. He's worried about divisions in the church, particularly even senior clergy calling him a heretic. This is Francis. The way that religion has been taken over by nationalist currents and funded very often by very big money and financial interests. The manipulation by right-wing media. The failure of the church in the United States to speak out with a strong, united voice on these things. Instead, most Catholics apparently voted for Trump. And now we see the results of that with Trump manipulating, her Trump Bible. Or how manipulative is that? His policies on deporting refugees and asylum seekers, defunding foreign aid, social services, United Nations services, healthcare, and so on. The international architecture, political architecture, economic architecture is fraying. So, and particularly he's, as he has been always, opposed to the economic ideology of neoliberalism, that markets will automatically produce the best result. We don't have to worry about the morals of it. He says, no, we have to be worried. We have to ensure that markets work fairly for everybody, equitable distribution. And he's worried about the astonishing accumulation of wealth in a very few hands. So we have the spectre now, the richest man in the world, apparently, Mr. Musk. People were speculating that his wealth might have reached briefly, but $500 billion, $1,000 billion. It is just astonishing. We've never seen such wealth in the world. I think it's been reduced more recently. But it shows you the immense power a small group of people with immense wealth have over the political process and the economic process. This is what Francis has always been worried about and where it's going to take us. So a word about Pope Leo. He's had this Latin American experience, so he thinks very much along the lines of Pope Francis on these things. And he was made a bishop in 2015 in Peru, northeast Peru. Chiclayo is the name of the town. It has about 800,000 people, so it's not a small town. It's the fourth biggest in Peru, but it has all the problems that Peru has too. And then Pope Francis had his eye on him, so he appointed him to be prefect of dicastery of bishops, which is the organisation which chooses who are to be bishops around the world. So very important. And he was also president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. So he had he was already involved in the conferences and so on in Latin America, but now as a cardinal, he is a very prominent role. So it's not surprising, given all that the Latin Americans particularly wanted him as their next pope. So he was a strong supporter of Pope Francis, the reform agenda, better governance, synodality process, the defense of human Vatican II. So he's ideally placed to follow Pope Francis. A quick word on Dilexi Vos, the document, the first document Pope Francis issued just 1 year ago tomorrow, actually. It's on the human and divine love of Jesus, of the heart of Jesus Christ. And what he's talking about this is the need for affect in our religion, to feel loved by God and to really be able to express that in other ways, that if we're loved by God, then we're free to love others as well. And he quotes, this is Francis writing, "I never tire of repeating that Jesus told us this in the clearest possible terms. Just as you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me," quoting Mark's Gospel. He now asks us to meet him there in every one of our brothers and sisters, especially in the poor, the despised, and the abandoned members of society. He goes on, "The present document can help us see that the teaching of the social encyclicals, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, is not unrelated to encounter with the love of Jesus Christ. For it is that love that makes us capable of forging bonds of fraternity and recognizing the dignity of every human being, and of working together to care for our common home." And almost in the last paragraph, he writes, "I ask Jesus Christ to grant through his Sacred Heart to inspire us to journey together towards a just, solidary, and fraternal world." So this is very big picture stuff he's talking about. He's not just talking about charitable one-to-one activity, but he's looking at the whole globe. How do we have the structures in place, the institutions in place that ensure that wealth is distributed more fairly, that everybody has enough food, that everybody has shelter, and all the rest of the things that we need? So this is his great agenda. And this is what Leo picks up in his document. And he says that this saying of Jesus, when you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me, is expressing Christ's intense solidarity in almost his identification with the poor. He writes, "This is not a matter of mere human kindness, but a revelation. In the poor, Christ continues to speak to us. Here we see the revealed very heart of Christ, his deepest feelings and choices." And so Leo is expanding this to speaking not just to Catholics, but to all Christians who are, and invites them to be inspired, to be attentive to the sufferings and needs of others, and confirmed in our efforts to work in this work of liberation as instruments for the spread of his love. And he quotes Saint Pope Paul VI at the Second Vatican Council, saying that the ancient parable of the Samaritan served as a model of a council spirituality. Isn't that an extraordinary statement? The Samaritan served as a model for the council. And then Leo writes, "I'm convinced that the preferential choice for the poor is a source of extraordinary renewal for the church and for society. In hearing the cry of the poor, we ask to enter the heart of God, who is always concerned for those in greatest need." So Leo then goes on to attack the end, much in the line of echoing Pope Francis. Somebody say, is Pope Francis writing this, or is Leo writing this? And Cardinal Cerny said they're both writing it. And I think that's true. Leo blames the mentality that blissfully ignores the effects of extreme inequality. He says the illusion of happiness derived from a comfortable life pushes people towards a vision of life centered on the accumulation of wealth and social success, even at the expense of others. Thus, in a world where the poor are increasingly numerous, paradoxically, we see the growth of a wealthy elite living in a bubble of comfort and luxury, almost in another world compared to ordinary people. So he repeats what Francis is saying about the indifference and how we after a while we can easily just tolerate the indifference that millions of people die of hunger or survive in conditions unfit for human beings, he writes. He said a few years ago, the photo of a lifeless child on a Mediterranean beach, dead there from drowning, caused an uproar. But this is happening thousands, millions of times all over the world, not in precisely the same circumstances. He says the poor are not there by chance or by blind and cruel fate, meaning they're there because we haven't organised the world well enough to ensure that everybody has enough. He said, nor for most of them is poverty a choice. Yet there are those who still presume to make this claim, thus revealing their own blindness and cruelty. And he goes on, the fact that some ridicule or dismiss charitable works as if they were an obsession on the part of a few and not the burning heart of the church's mission convinces me of the need to go back and reread the gospel. So that's what he does in this next section, the 2/3 of it. He goes to explain how the church in Latin America 50 years ago began this process of reflection and meeting in small groups, implementing a lot of the See Judge Act process from the Cardine methods that had been widely adopted in Latin America, used in different places. And this became the groundwork for the process that we now recognise as synodality, or has emerged as synodality, but has been going on throughout Latin America for 50 years. When the bishops would meet, all the bishops of Latin America would meet in conference together, and they'd work out what the church needed to do in Latin America at that time. And there were 5 of these major 10-yearly conferences. But in preparation for, there was a vast network of parishes and dioceses pooling their resources and feeding up into the, much as we did on the synod or the plenary council here in Australia, in the synod process, the Pope has been promoting. So the point is that out of that emerges this preferential love of the poor. And now what Pope Leo is doing in this, as Pope Francis had done for the interior spirituality, Pope Leo is now doing to show through taking in the next few chapters on how the church has done this all through its history, right from the very beginning, how it had a preference for the poor. And he quotes Jesus, of course. There's a chapter on the scriptures, how he says, we have to state without mincing words that there is an inseparable bond between our faith and the poor. And then he sketches not all through the history of the church, from the patristic age. He quotes John Chrysostom, the Archbishop of Constantinople in the early 400s. God does not need golden vessels, but golden souls. feed the hungry first, and only afterward adorn the temple with what remains. He vehemently denounced excessive wealth connected with indifference for the poor. He said not giving to the poor, stealing from them, defrauding them of their lives. So Leo goes through this, he goes on to how St. Augustine, who was, the inspiration for the Augustinian order to which he himself belongs. In the year, he was bishop in Hippo in North Africa, and he died in 430. He said, for Augustine, the poor are not just people to be helped, but they are the sacramental presence of the Lord. And Leo commented that in Augustine's view, anyone who says they love God and has no compassion for the needy is lying. So the whole theology of this period is very strong. And we have the development of the orders to look after sick people, the hospital order, and others, the women's orders, particularly like the Daughters of St. Vincent de Paul, and many others that even now work in various war zones and remote areas. He says, the Christian presence among the sick reveals that salvation is not an abstract idea, but concrete action. It's being faithful to Christ, saying, I was sick and you visited me. And then he goes on to discuss the roles of the monasteries, how they were places of refuge in medieval Europe for widows, abandoned children, beggars, and pilgrims. And then how the religious orders established to form forms of redeem people from slavery. And he contrasts that with the modern forms of slavery, human trafficking, forced labor, sexual exploitation, and so on. He says the mission of the church is always to proclaim liberation. And he quoted Pope Francis that even today, millions of people, children, women, and men of all ages, are deprived of freedom and forced to live in conditions akin to slavery. Well, we know this happens even in our own country. We've seen this. And then, of course, he talks about the prodigious growth of the religious orders in the 19th century and 20th century, dedicated to education, healthcare, pastoral care of migrants and refugees, social support for the poor, and so on. And we're familiar with all because we've benefited so much in this country and elsewhere from all these things, and they're continuing in new forms. And then when he comes to the modern period, he looks to Pope Leo XIII, whom he's named after, with the great encyclical Rerum Novarum on the condition of the working classes. He's saying now in this global situation, we have an analogous situation developing where we have great numbers of poor people and poor distribution of wealth. And we need to get this, to work on this, how to do this better. And he says that a church more closely resembling her Lord would be working to foster a concrete commitment on the part of all humanity to solving the immense problem of poverty in the world. And then he quotes, I won't go through them in detail, but there goes through St. John Paul II, who is very vigorous in his social teaching, of course, Benedict as well, Pope Benedict, again calling for institutional reform, particularly of economic institutions, and addressing the great food crisis that's developing. So Leo and Francis are really speaking with one voice. It's you can tell where Leo has added a little bit on. He says, identifies that, but he's really worked this and looking again to the Latin America experience and saying, how can we, what is the message for us for the world? It is to be personally connecting with poor people, not just as an abstract idea, but personally, being touched by their world, and those with the skills and resources to be able to draw on those to do what we can to make a difference. we may not be able to do enormous great initiatives or things, but in our own way, in our own circle, we have voice and we can do things. We have resources, we have education, we have connections. Instead, what we see, as Francis said in the dictatorship in Evangelii Gaudium, the dictatorship of an economy that kills is growing. And the gap between the prosperous few and the many people who are quite living in very dire situations is growing. A new tyranny is being born, invisible and often virtual, which unilaterally and relentlessly imposes its own laws and rules. So he goes on and he says, unless we stop and take this matter seriously, we will continue openly and surreptitiously to legitimize the present model of distribution, where a minority believes it has the right to consume in a way that can never be universalized, since a planet couldn't even contain the waste products of such consumption. So, in conclusion, we can see that Leo is not stepping back from Francis' initiatives in all these matters, and it looks as if he's prepared to speak out strongly too, because it's his responsibility. And he's speaking as far as he can in collaboration with the other Christian groups, certainly, with non-Christian groups as well. And when they launched Laudato Si, because of the connections they'd made through the United Nations and with their agents, their own people, the Muslims issued a similar document soon after. The Buddhists issued one. The Jewish people issued a similar document. All the great religions issued similar documents. And so what this is saying, I think we need to be able to speak more, not just with Christians with single voice, but with all people of goodwill who are working, drawing from the expertise of really well-informed people, like Pope Francis has been drawing on the expertise of people in the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, Pontifical Academy for Social Sciences. These are top economists in the world. They're top people in the United Nations and other international organizations, many Nobel Prize winners among them. And these two organizations of climate change and the economy and various other matters have been briefing the Pope and the various papal agencies for many years now, including John Paul II. So there are expert opinion that are sought before the Vatican will speak on these things, but it is usually very sure of its ground. So in conclusion, I want to say that the modern popes, what Leo does in this document is demonstrate that the stress of modern popes on eradicating poverty, hunger, and human rights is totally in accord with the core message of Jesus in the New Testament. Indeed, he knits his encyclic or the document together around Jesus' message when he declares in the synagogue of Nazareth, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to bring release, freedom to captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and let the oppressed go free." So Leo is telegraphing all Christians to look more closely at their Bibles, to recall how intensely Jesus felt about care for the poor and sick, and how responsive he was to people in distress. For any who think that the church should stick to narrowly religious matters of worship or stay right out of debates about social and political issues, Leo responds that the long tradition of the church demonstrates that Christians have always endeavoured to take to heart the commandment to care for our neighbours as ourselves. So that's where I finish with this. There's much more to be said. There's much more to be said about the church, how it engages in politics. But I think Pope Francis is a bit of a model in this. Get your story straight first. Know what you're talking about. Get really informed people behind you. And then speak to the moral issues. Don't get involved in the party politics. No, that's not what the church is involved in, one party against another, and except in extreme circumstances like against Hitler. But to defend those basic moral and social principles about humanity and human well-being and the future of our planet at this stage. So that's the message, I think, from both Francis and Leo. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for that wonderful tour de force of the new document from Pope Leo, placing it in the context of the challenges that the world is facing, and also particularly showing the strong linkage between the teaching of Pope Francis and also what Pope Leo has now presented to us in Dilexi Te. So now it's open forum for everybody. Well, anyway, while everybody's thinking of a question, I can start off with a question, Bruce, and that is, like as you said, the church in Latin America has got 50 years of experience of working this way with the option for the poor. Speaking of a church promoting liberation for people, I'm just wondering what you think about the Australian church. Is the Australian church ready to hear that message?
Gosh. Certainly many are, I think. But others, I think, are very slow. I think there's great diversity across the church, and that's particularly what Pope Francis is trying to, and Leo, trying to address, to overcome this polarization within the church between so-called progressives and so-called conservatives. Certainly, Francis is pushing, or Pope Francis was pushing ahead, and so was Leo, that as circumstances change, we have to adjust to new situations. And this is what's happening all around the world. And he is insisting that the way to do this is through dialogue together as communities and in the wider civil society and with all the various organizations we belong to reflect on our own. It's really the CSsR process has been developed in many different directions by different people, but it basically is taking our own experience seriously, being able to talk about it, evaluate it in sort of ethical or moral terms. Is this where I want to be? Is this the right place for me at the moment? Are we going in the right direction? What needs to change? And then, so that's the discernment process Francis is talking about. And then, of course, Francis is very strong. It's got no endless circles of talking. You have to end up on, at some stage, on some point of action to get some result out of all this activity and energy. So I think this is a bit of a shock to us in Australia, because I think we've had in some ways, a very complacent church, that everything's just rolling along, the parishes are all okay, apart from the abuse crisis, of course. That was a terrible shock for us. And maybe that's a wake-up call that we need to move to a different style of church, where everybody has a voice. or can have a voice if they wish to. Everyone can be involved. Everybody belongs. And he talks about widen the tent, and not just have a narrow tent with just us involved in there, but widen the tent so that anybody who is passing by can join in. It's welcome. Everyone is welcome. He kept reiterating that. And so I think it's very different in different places in Australia. Some places have embraced this synodality process very strongly and have had a strong education and are moving forward very happily with this, and others are further back because of historical circumstances or lack of resources. Many of the dioceses are really strapped for resources, of course, and so the bigger dioceses have to pick up more of the load somehow or other. And maybe situations like this webinar we're having now are part of doing that, how we do that.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Yes, I see David. I think David's got a comment there or a question. David Moloney, would you like to speak to it?
What was it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, David. I think David was going to make a comment. Were you?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. Thanks, Bruce, for that. The fantastic unfolding. The thing that strikes me in the encyclical, not that I've read it all, but I've been directed in it through yourself and others, is Leo's puzzlement as to why Catholics think they can disregard the poor in spite of Jesus' teaching, to put it on the, to put it in the future. So my question is, how can the Australian Church turn so absolutely to the spiritual and ministry rather than the human and the apostolic, such as in the YCW and Cardine movements? Is the evangelistic potential of service and love not recognised? Sort of going in a few directions there, but maybe you have some comment, Bruce.
I'm not sure if I heard everything you were saying there.
Okay, sorry. Well, it's just the comment, I guess, on Leo's, I think, remarkable statement that he can't understand how Christians or Catholics think they can disregard the poor in view of Jesus' teaching. And it's a remarkable statement, and it's a remarkable situation. And I just wonder what solutions or what might have caused it, and what might be the solutions in your view.
That's a big question.
Yes.
For one person
Yes.
to answer. Others may, while Bruce is speaking, you may wish to think of some suggestions on other people's part. Yeah, go, Bruce. Yeah.
I don't know, David. I suppose people are different. People, when confronted by poverty, put up defense mechanisms against it because they don't want to be caught up in other people's problems, or it's just too big to handle, or I'm just struggling along as I am and I can't handle any more pressure from these things. I think all those sorts of things, and I think some people, they're not in a position to do very much. I was thinking of some of my relatives, older relatives, who do, identify one was a nurse and she very much identifies with people in distress, but she's old and she can't do. I mean, she prays for people, and hopefully she has an influence on another generation of people. But why? Well, I think Jesus, his demand really, we take the poor seriously, is demanding of us. It challenges us. And because we can easily get comfortable with where we are or what we're doing. We will have to have a certain level of comfort, otherwise we can't manage and do what we have to do, and we want to be comfortable for our families and so on. But there comes a point where it's not enough. We need to be doing more somehow or other, and it's that it might only be a little bit more, but like the widow in the Gospel, she had 2 small coins she put in the treasury box or the upkeep of the temple. And Jesus saw that. He said, and that is more significant in God's eyes than all the other great things that people were doing for the temple. So in God's eyes, they may not be big things, but they may be important things for somebody. And certainly for anybody who is in distress or trouble. I don't know. I'm really struggling with that question.
Yeah, I think we all are, Bruce. I see Mark Agar has a comment or a question. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. In my parish, they recently put out a thing where everybody should be stewards, and they had a list of things that you could do. And it was things like join the church choir, take up the collections, put the flowers out, and all these really good things. But there was very little about actually changing the world, through social justice. Even if everybody nods their heads and says, yes, Pope Leo, we have to do something about poverty in the world and the environment, that's actually not going to fix it. The only way to fix it is if workers use their expertise, get themselves together, in the light of what the Pope's saying, and apply their expertise to these problems, to fix structures and to get people to look at climate change, from an expertise point of view, and, stop these greedy people from having all the money. It needs the application of lay people who are experts in their fields to sort this out. So, it would be good if Christians got together and talk about these things and come up with good solutions. The Pope's given a good challenge, and I think it's up to us now. I can give some money to the poor, but that would be good, but it's not going to fix it. It's not going to fix the causes of what's going on.
Yeah, great comment, Mark. Anybody else like to chime in at this point?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it. Yep, I can't see what your name is, but please feel free.
Yes. Can I speak now?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
My name's Trish Hindmarsh, and I want to thank Bruce. It's just wonderful, Bruce, that you're still doing this amazing prophetic work within our Australian church. I've valued it so much, and particularly the way you drew together, made a synthesis of the last few important documents that the popes have written for us, and the way Leo is backing up Francis. But look, I just wondered if you could comment on what seems to me a trend from the more traditional far-right side of the church that seems to disassociate social justice as integral to the Catholic faith. It's something alien, and in fact, sometimes use that word that's so handy now to dismiss it, as those who go down this track are among the woke. The word woke seems to be such a handy thing to hit people over the head with now. And it used to be that if you did this in Pedro Arrupe's time or Hilda Kamara's time, you were dismissed as a communist if you ask for hard justice questions. That famous quote about, if I feed the poor, that's wonderful. But if I ask why the poor are poor and look at the root causes. So would you be able to comment on this idea of woke? Why people are being dismissed as woke? This is among the Catholic community. If they take seriously the intrinsic need as a baptised person to be a supporter, a great worker for social justice for all.
Well, thank you very much, Trish. It's good to see you and Vin here. I'm really puzzled by that too. I don't hear in the circles I normally with hear people doing that, so it's interesting to hear. But I know that it is in the media, certainly an American thing. I guess it's an easy way to dismiss people from serious consideration, that they're just driven by ideology and they don't really know what they're talking about, and they're a bit silly, all those sorts of things. And I don't know how you address that. It raises another question that Jesus got killed for what he was saying, and many other people have been killed. Like not Hilda Kamari didn't, but there's so many others in Latin America and elsewhere are dying because of their stand on these things. So some people, I'm thinking particularly of, I think, very rich people, not so much in Australia, but particularly thinking overseas, where the degree of wealth is almost obscene, and the extravagance in lifestyles. I think even Mr. Trump, putting gold on all the doorknobs and everything around there. It's just there's something very evil about that. I'm not saying he's an evil person himself, but he's certainly he's not acting in us all in a Christian way, and I don't, he waves the Bible around when it suits him, but I doubt if he's ever read it. He doesn't seem to know any quotes that people have asked him, and he can't quote anything. And I think that a lot of people can be easily beguiled by a whole system where, if you want to get rich, well, this is the way you've got to do it. Not everybody's like that, of course, I know, and there are wealthy people who for various reasons, have done spectacularly well in good businesses and so on. But then they use their money. They invest it in productive things. They don't squander it on luxuries and they put it to good use. And there are numbers of these people. And I think a lot of people, when in their situation, if they have surplus wealth, think seriously about where that could best be used to support in our community or wider human well-being somewhere. And particularly when the climate crisis is getting so serious. I didn't talk about this when I was speaking, and I noticed that just more recently in the Vatican, they're not talking about it too much either, about how dire the situation has become on the climate change. And of course, we've been watching reports, international reports from various expert UN bodies and others about how bad it is becoming with temperature rises. The sea levels will rise, and we see that farming communities now are experiencing that all over, everywhere, really. And people are very worried about how we can secure food production for our current population, even if it doesn't increase much more than, the global population, So it is, and water shortages are going to be extreme, and in places like India and China, who are dependent on the runoff from the Himalayas, if they lose a lot of their snow melt or the ice melt from those mountains, what happens to the rivers? How do people get by? And in that situation, it's a recipe for really serious ongoing conflict and wars. So the whole thing is cascading. So I think what I don't know if we'll see any encyclicals a bit like Laudato Si in the near future, because it is so threatening for people. They can turn off. They don't want to hear anymore. And there are places that, like I was preaching in one parish recently, and just about Laudato Si, and the lady came up to me and she said, "The Pope is not infallible." What she meant by that was, this is a scientific business and the Pope shouldn't be saying. But what I wanted to say to her, but didn't get a chance, was, yes, but the Pope is pointing to the moral issues about human well-being, and this is what the science tells us. So that so you get a reaction that church shouldn't be talking about these things. They're scientific matters. Their church has nothing to do with this, or they're political matters, and church should stay right of it. But it's not the gospel.
Right. Thanks, Bruce. I see 3 more people on the list now. John Browning has a question, and then there's Anita and Paul Lenton. John, would you like to speak to your question?
Yes, thank you. I made the comment that many Catholic parishes, schools and hospitals in Australia minister to wealthy and privileged communities. This includes Augustinian schools, for which Leo was responsible as the head of the order. Do we know anything about what his expectations were in terms of action for social justice in Augustinian schools in wealthy countries?
I certainly don't know that it's a real issue. I mean, the Jesuits were confronting this some years ago, and many of them did reorientate their ministries into, like Frank Brenner, Indigenous issues, or working with poor communities and groups. And I presume the Augustinians have been a bit the same, but I don't have any direct contact with any of their communities, so I really can't speak to it. But it is a very serious matter. We're victims of our own success in a way that we did so well looking after the poor that everybody wanted to come. But I think as time goes on, it's getting harder to maintain the ethos of Catholic organisations. So many people working, and they're very good people generally, and the managers of them are doing a brilliant job. There are many haven't got Catholic background or even a Christian background, and this is increasingly the case in the hospitals and in schools too, and even among the schools, in the Catholic schools, a number of people who are not Catholic or Christian is growing. So this is some of you others might have more insight into this than I have.
Thanks, Bruce. Actually, I missed one person in that list of others wanting to ask questions. Hans from Singapore. Would you like to, and then there'll be Anita. Hans, would you like to speak to your question?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I read the document and really impressed by it, but I was somewhat puzzled that the popes went through great length, 3 chapters to talk about the love for the poor, citing scriptures, the work of the saints, and social doctrine. And well, actually, so the well, maybe not the Catholic population, but many would actually know that it's quite understood. Church teachings on the poor is quite known. I just curious, why is this attempt at this point of time? And my thoughts is perhaps a big segments of our Catholic Church around the world, cardinals, archbishops, and all, are still actually not quite there in terms of the being with the poor, or believe, or even act in terms of the preparation, love for the poor, not to mention social justice. So I just wanted when Bruce or anyone would like to comment, I just got very puzzled by this.
Yes, why is the Pope spending so much time on all the history and of what the church has been involved with? I think what he's trying to do is to draw in the more conservative sections of the church into recognizing that ministry to the poor or with the poor is totally gospel. And not only, it is at the heart of the gospel, that when all's said and done, it's like the Samaritan, the example of the Samaritan. It's what we do to help others in need when we have a chance. But of course, we're not. Everybody's circumstances are different, and I think this is basically an effort by both the popes to say to the people who are really on the conservative wing, how the message of a church to engage in justice and live more frugally and all those sorts of things is really part of the core message of Jesus. And it's not just as we were saying, a woke or a trendy thing to do for the sake of looking good or something. Others might have something to Hans. That was a good question. Yes.
Maybe we'll go to Anita, who's also got a comment which may be related to that. Would you like to speak, Anita? Are you there? I can't hear you at this point. If not,
you are, is that it?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, and
sorry,
see you.
yes.
Great.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, it was quite interesting. I don't mix much in church circles these days, but I did read the encyclicals, and it did just the last chapter that spoke then. It did talk a lot about the poor. I've got to say, about the poor, and just in the message that I've put there, it's very hard to have a platform for the voice of the poor, of who we are referring to as the poor, in quotes sort of thing, because they, it wouldn't even occur to the poor to have the term used about them. So to be actually heard, and one of the examples I said that where you can is on NITV, hear the voice of Indigenous people and their stories, and they don't talk about being poor, but they are a wide section of people that we wouldn't hear otherwise. I was also thinking back into the Tenants Union, Housing Commission Tenants Union in Melbourne that I was in, and it's hard work to listen to the voice of the poor, because often people are hurt by the emotion of what's happening. There's people who, find it hard to speak in front of other people, and generally, and particularly in the church, we tend to speak for them. And we listen to the person who can be the most articulate or on their behalf. We and even our own, exposure to press we hear, you know, from the very good works which people do, of course, but from even say from Catholic charity organisations, we hear on their behalf. We very rarely hear the people who need the not because they need it, but we very rarely hear their voice. They're spoken of on behalf of someone goodwill. That's in the tenants union that we probably learned that was what you don't do if you ever want to hear the voice of the actual person concerned. Is don't talk on their behalf, and it's hard work. And I think in churches, parishes, groups, all sorts of things, we would let the person speak in council meetings. If you ever try to bring up anything at a local council and they silence you or put you on the bottom of the list, whether you're articulate or not, there are ways to keep people silent. So I just noticed in the encyclicals there was a lot, but you know, it was a lot, of course, that needed to be said. But say just this audience that are here now with, you know, on our Zoom. You probably don't have to convince most people what was said there. It was nice to hear it, and it was good to hear it, and good to hear of all the organisations. But we were never going to sort of hear from the poor in that realm. The other voice we do hear is say now the Palestinians, and we wouldn't hear their voice otherwise. You know, it's under the most tragic circumstances. So otherwise, I can't quite think of where we have an easy platform for the poor to speak for themselves and be be heard. Yeah.
Thank you, Anita. That was wonderful. You're quite right. And in fact, in the documents that we've had, and going right back through the Parasita conference, are very strong on letting the poor have. Finding ways for the poor to have voice, to speak for themselves, and to be subjects of their own development, not objects or of somebody else's program, but really having that agency in their own lives and voice. So that's very
not really to give them the poor, but to get out of their way when they're speaking. Yeah, that's because the church is hierarchical, whether it, you know, likes it or not. And so that's even the you know, we sometimes hear discussion about the voice of women and so on as though it's some advanced sort of thing, but it's as you say, it's the centre of all that the encyclical there too. Yeah.
And the other point that you raised about the poor, we use the word poor, don't we? But it's a bit misleading the way we use it, because it's really biblical code for everybody who's in trouble or distress in some way. So
or everybody except us, you know what I mean? We put a distance by calling someone the poor. We're putting a distance between. It's not me. Just there's a distance between who we can call the poor by putting ourselves in that realm.
Yeah. Yes.
Could I just make a comment on that? Actually, this week in Rome, it's even been in that Paul VI hall where they have all the big meetings. There's a meeting of the popular movements, which I don't know if we've really got any Australian sort of links to that, which is quite unfortunate, really. But I just saw a reporting about it yesterday. Pope Francis started. It was during Pope Francis' time that they started to have links with this. I forgot the exact title of it. The World something of Popular Movements, which basically means grassroots movements. You know, people who are poor, in fact, even if they don't sort of kind of identify themselves in that way. So I thought that was actually quite interesting. I saw Cardinal Czerny also making the comment. He was there sitting with the people, commenting on this exact point about people themselves being subjects, taking action, agency, all those sort of things. So there is some things happening, and maybe we need to be more connected as Aussies with some of that too. But anyway, look, I know Paul Lenton's been waiting for a while to comment or ask a question. So Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. And in the waiting, I think others have asked the question far more eloquently than I could, and thanks to Bruce for his responses. So I'll sit on my hands on this one, I think.
All right, great. Thanks, Paul. All right. Anybody else? I think we're getting close to the end now, so I'm not sure if there's any last final comments. If it's kind of, if you do wish to speak, now is the time. Otherwise, we'll move to the close. Last call. Okay, I think, yeah, we really have had a good discussion already. So I think now I will move to thanking Bruce for his presentation, which really has opened up so many avenues for us. And I think also so many of the questions and comments that have been made have really opened up things that lines of action that we can potentially take. So we're more of a study circle here at the Australian Cardine Institute, but I know there are others out there who are actually taking practical action. Probably you're also involved in different groups, but I know Mark Agar is involved with the Cardine community, so they definitely are trying to organise grassroots groups in parishes and around Australia. So if there are people interested in getting organised, gathering together, there are avenues, small avenues, but there are avenues and challenges out there. So once again, thanks very much, Bruce, for being with us today, and thanks to everybody for joining us. And next month we're having the Cardine lecture, so we hope you'll all be with us again next month. It's actually Archbishop Tim Costello from Perth who'll be joining us for that occasion. So thanks again, everybody. See you all next time.